Jerusalem. I never tire of this holy city. It was my second home for over 10 years. On this visit, I wanted to reflect on the rebirth of Jerusalem, a city that, more than any other city on earth, stands as a bridge between the past and the future of the world. And it's always good to walk these streets with my longtime friend and Israeli guide, Kenny Garon. Kenny, Jerusalem sure has expanded since biblical times, since the times of Jeremiah.
In leaps and bounds, Jimmy.
What would they say the population of Jerusalem would have been at the time of Jeremiah?
Jeremiah? The archaeologists talk about a city about the size of 5,000 inhabitants, which would have been the equivalent of a very large city in its day.
And of course, today, what, 500,000 here in the city of Jerusalem?
The latest figures, Jimmy, over the 600,000 mark, surpassing Tel Aviv. Jerusalem is our largest metropolitan city today.
And out of 108 nations of the world, the people have come. Ben Yehuda Street, more or less a cross-section of all of society, especially in the Jewish world, and now here living in Jerusalem.
For sure.
Oh, let me introduce our friend here. This is Kenny Garon. He is my favorite guide and one of the favorite guides in all of Israel when the tourists, the pilgrims, come from all over the world to visit this land. Now, we don't normally plan a visit to Ben Yehuda Street as a part of our itinerary, but they like to sneak out at night, don't they?
How true it is. If you're into people watching, sitting out in the coffee shops, this is the place to be.
I was mentioning out of 108 nations of the world, that's 108 languages or dialects that would have been spoken by this new nation that came into existence after some 2,000 years. The challenge would have been, how then could they communicate to each other?
The loss of spoken Hebrew began 600 years before Christ. The prophets of Israel announced that God would use the nation of Babylon to discipline or correct Jerusalem from her spiritual decline. The Babylonian invasion from what is today modern Iraq and captivity that followed scattered the chosen people to the four corners of the earth. The exiles were forced to learn new languages and abandon Hebrew as the language of the marketplace. Only in the 20th century rebirth of the nation have the fathers and architects of modern Israel realized that for returning international immigrants, a unified nation would require a common language. Only the recovery of ancient Hebrew would truly bind their past to their future.
We are here on Ben Yehuda Street, and that name, Ben Yehuda, very important in understanding how the people eventually were able to learn to communicate together. Since they spoke over 100 languages, it was pretty tough in the beginning, but tell us about Eliezer Ben Yehuda. He was the man that really brought back the Hebrew language, wasn't he?
Eliezer Ben Yehuda. Jimmy, it's not by chance that every Israeli city that prides itself on being a city, her equivalent of Main Street is named in honor of this man, Ben Yehuda. A man with a vision, a man who realized exactly what you just said, that to bring a people back to their land, in order to be successful, they needed to communicate. They need a language. And what finer language than the original tongue, the ancient Hebrew language.
Now, what did he just start to teach his own family to speak Hebrew and then from there develop all the new words?
Keep in mind, Jimmy, Hebrew as a language was never lost. It was the holy language for the Jewish people.
Used in synagogue and things like that.
Exactly, reserved for prayer and the religious services. It was the vision of Eliezer Ben Yehuda that made Hebrew, after an absence of over 2,000 years, a modern spoken language.
Speaking and educating their children and commerce and day-to-day conversation. Now, I know you come from America originally, Louisiana, correct?
Yes, sir.
Oh, down there in Cajun country. But when you came here, you didn't know how to speak Hebrew, did you?
To speak Hebrew, no. Keep in mind, Jimmy, growing up in a traditional family, I knew the Hebrew alphabet.
Okay.
I could, in order to recite the prayers, in order to prepare myself for my bar mitzvah ceremony. But no, the process of learning The Hebrew language I acquired here in Israel.
And how did you go about learning the language?
Well, a nation that comprises absorbing the Jews from the four corners of the earth has set up an intensive language program. A 6-month language school, Hebrew language school.
Is that the Ulpan that I've
The
heard
Ulpan, yes, exactly.
And what happens when you go there?
Well, it's you just submerge yourself 24 hours a day in the Hebrew language.
Only speaking Hebrew.
Only speaking.
Forget
Hebrew.
English, French, Italian,
Exactly,
Spanish,
exactly.
whatever.
Yes, that's the common denominator between, because I was at Ulpan not just with fellow Americans or fellow English speakers. So very rapidly, in order to communicate with your fellow students, Hebrew became, in a very short period, the common denominator, the bond.
Were you pretty proficient after about 6 months?
I've never lied to you before, Jimmy. I'm not going to start now. Proficient, I wouldn't say. You know when I became proficient?
No,
when I joined the Israeli Defense Force Army.
Oh, really?
Yes, that's a good way to learn Hebrew.
And so you develop your understanding of Hebrew and how to communicate to people.
Yes.
Well, indeed, Ben Yehuda was very important in the history of the nation of Israel and the regathering of the Jewish people back into the land, giving the people a way to communicate with each other in this modern day period.